The restaurant industry has always been unforgiving, but recent years have pushed even established names to their breaking points. Rising operational costs, shifting consumer habits, and economic pressures have created a perfect storm that's claiming casualties at an unprecedented rate. What we're witnessing isn't just temporary struggles or minor setbacks. These are fundamental collapses of business models that once seemed bulletproof, backed by decades of customer loyalty and market presence. The warning signs have been accumulating for months, sometimes years, but corporate communications have masked the severity until it became impossible to hide. Empty dining rooms, unpaid suppliers, mass layoffs, and legal battles paint a picture of an industry segment in genuine crisis. Today, we're examining 6 restaurant chains that aren't just struggling with quarterly earnings or temporary setbacks. These are companies staring directly into the abyss of complete financial collapse, with bankruptcy filings, mass closures, and creditor demands creating situations that may prove impossible to recover from. Number 6. Red Lobster. The sight of darkened Red Lobster locations across American suburbs tells a story of spectacular corporate miscalculation and financial desperation. What was once the undisputed leader in casual seafood dining has become a case study in how quickly decades of brand equity can evaporate when fundamental business operations collapse under their own weight. The bankruptcy filing that shocked industry observers wasn't the result of a single catastrophic event, but rather the inevitable conclusion of years of mounting pressures that management seemed powerless to address. Supplier relationships that took generations to build have crumbled as unpaid invoices accumulated beyond any reasonable expectation of settlement. Seafood distributors who once competed for Red Lobster's business now refuse to deliver products without immediate payment, creating supply chain disruptions that make consistent menu offerings impossible to maintain. Mass closures have accelerated at a pace that suggests panic rather than strategic restructuring. Locations that generated steady revenue for years have been shuttered overnight, often leaving employees with minimal notice and customers arriving at locked doors and hastily posted closure signs. The corporate communications around these closures have been notably sparse, consisting mainly of generic statements about operational optimization that fail to acknowledge the human cost of such dramatic downsizing. Creditors circling the wounded chain represent a diverse collection of suppliers, landlords, and service providers who collectively hold claims that dwarf the company's remaining assets. Seafood suppliers alone are owed millions in unpaid invoices, while property management companies face mounting unpaid rent obligations that threaten the viability of entire shopping centers where Red Lobster served as anchor tenants. The financial statements that emerged during bankruptcy proceedings revealed operational losses that had been mounting for quarters, masked by corporate accounting practices that delayed recognition of fundamental problems. Food costs that should have been manageable became unsustainable as purchasing power diminished and supplier relationships deteriorated. Labor expenses remained fixed even as customer traffic declined, creating a margin squeeze that made profitable operations impossible at most locations. Franchise operators found themselves caught between corporate mandates and financial reality, with many choosing to break franchise agreements rather than continue operating unprofitable locations. The franchise model that once provided steady expansion opportunities became a liability as individual operators struggled with supply chain costs and declining customer demand that corporate management seemed unable to address effectively. Marketing efforts that once drove customer traffic have been reduced to desperate promotional pricing that further eroded already thin profit margins. The endless shrimp promotions that traditionally attracted budget-conscious diners became loss leaders that accelerated financial decline rather than driving sustainable business growth. Number 5. Boston Market. The collapse of Boston Market reads like a textbook example of how operational negligence and financial mismanagement can destroy even the most established restaurant concepts. What began as scattered reports of individual location closures has evolved into a systematic dismantling of a chain that once competed successfully against much larger, fast casual competitors. Legal battles surrounding unpaid wages have created a public relations nightmare that extends far beyond typical corporate disputes. Former employees describe working for weeks without compensation, while corporate management assured them that payroll delays were temporary administrative issues. Class action lawsuits filed in multiple states paint a picture of systematic wage theft that suggests financial desperation rather than isolated accounting problems. Shuttered stores across major metropolitan markets have left former employees, suppliers, and customers with little recourse for recovering money owed or completing prepaid meal programs. Gift cards that customers purchased in good faith have become worthless pieces of plastic as locations close without warning or explanation from corporate headquarters. The speed of deterioration has been particularly shocking for industry observers who remember Boston Market's position as a reliable alternative to traditional fast food offerings. Rotisserie chicken preparation that once set them apart from competitors became inconsistent as cost-cutting measures affected ingredient quality and cooking procedures. Side dishes that were once prepared fresh throughout the day were replaced with pre-packaged alternatives that customers immediately noticed and rejected. Supplier relationships have dissolved as unpaid invoices accumulated beyond any reasonable expectation of collection. Food distributors who once provided consistent deliveries now require cash on delivery terms that most remaining locations cannot meet. The result has been menu items that are frequently unavailable and food quality that varies dramatically between locations, depending on whatever ingredients individual managers can secure through alternative supply channels. Franchise agreements have been abandoned by operators who found themselves responsible for corporate debts and supplier obligations that were never clearly disclosed during the initial franchise purchase process. Many franchise owners report discovering financial obligations they never agreed to assume, creating legal disputes that may continue long after the last location closes permanently. The corporate response to mounting problems has been notably inadequate, consisting mainly of generic statements about restructuring efforts and operational improvements that bear no relationship to the reality experienced by employees, customers, and suppliers. Press releases announcing new menu items and promotional campaigns continued even as locations closed and employees went unpaid, suggesting a level of disconnect between corporate management and operational reality that made recovery impossible. Real estate obligations have created additional complications as landlords pursue collection actions against both corporate entities and individual franchise operators. Shopping centers and strip malls that relied on Boston Market as anchor tenants now face vacancy issues that affect the viability of surrounding businesses, creating ripple effects that extend far beyond the restaurant industry itself. The few locations that remain operational exist in a state of uncertainty that makes long-term planning impossible. Customers report inconsistent hours, limited menu availability, and service quality that varies wildly depending on staffing levels and supply availability. These remaining outposts feel more like remnants of a once successful concept rather than viable businesses with sustainable futures. Number 4. TGI Fridays. The neon signs and casual dining atmosphere that once made TGI Fridays synonymous with weekend celebrations and after-work gatherings now flicker weakly above restaurants that feel more like monuments to better times than thriving businesses. The dramatic sales declines that have plagued the chain represent more than temporary market adjustments or seasonal fluctuations. These are fundamental shifts in customer behavior that have left TGI Fridays scrambling to find relevance in a dining landscape that has moved decisively away from their core offerings. Franchise operators have been abandoning their agreements at rates that suggest panic rather than strategic business decisions. Multi-unit operators who once viewed TGI Fridays locations as reliable profit centers now describe them as financial anchors that drain resources from more successful ventures. The exodus of experienced franchisees has created operational gaps that corporate management appears unable to fill with suitable replacements, resulting in locations that operate with minimal oversight and declining standards. Failed rebranding attempts have only accelerated customer confusion and operational chaos. Menu overhauls that were supposed to attract younger demographics instead alienated longtime customers while failing to generate meaningful new traffic. The signature appetizers and casual atmosphere that once differentiated TGI Fridays from competitors have been diluted through cost-cutting measures and preparation shortcuts that removed the elements customers actually valued. Corporate debt obligations have reached levels that make normal business operations increasingly difficult to maintain. Equipment leasing agreements, supplier contracts, and real estate obligations create fixed costs that exceed revenue generation at most locations. The financial pressure has forced operational decisions that prioritize immediate cash flow over long-term sustainability, creating a downward spiral that becomes more difficult to reverse with each passing quarter. Marketing budgets that once supported national advertising campaigns have been slashed to levels that make brand visibility nearly impossible to maintain. Local promotional efforts vary dramatically between markets depending on individual operator resources, creating inconsistent brand messaging that confuses potential customers about what TGI Fridays currently offers or represents. Staff retention problems have created service inconsistencies that compound other operational challenges. High turnover rates mean most locations operate with inexperienced employees who lack proper training on food preparation techniques and customer service standards. The result is dining experiences that vary unpredictably from visit to visit, making it impossible for customers to develop reliable expectations about food quality or service levels. The competitive environment has evolved dramatically, while TGI Fridays struggled with internal financial pressures. Fast casual chains have captured market share by offering superior food quality at competitive prices, while other casual dining concepts have successfully updated their offerings to appeal to contemporary consumer preferences. TGI Fridays appears caught between market segments without a clear strategy for competing effectively in any of them. Number 3, Corner Bakery Cafe. The quiet bankruptcy that claimed Corner Bakery Cafe unfolded with remarkably little public attention, perhaps because the chain had already become largely invisible to most consumers long before financial collapse became inevitable. Countless locations that once provided reliable breakfast and lunch options in office, districts and suburban shopping centers now sit abandoned, their equipment removed and windows papered over with minimal explanation from corporate representatives. The speed with which locations disappeared suggests financial problems that had been developing for far longer than public communications indicated. Customers arriving for regular orders found locked doors and hastily posted closure notices that provided no information about final operating dates or alternative locations. Gift card holders and loyalty program members were left with no recourse for recovering prepaid balances or accumulated rewards. Supplier relationships collapsed as payment terms became increasingly extended and eventually stopped altogether. Food distributors who had provided consistent deliveries for years found themselves holding substantial unpaid invoices with no realistic prospect of collection. The ripple effects extended to local suppliers and service providers who depended on corner bakery locations for significant portions of their business revenue. Real estate obligations created additional complications as landlords pursued collection actions against corporate entities that appeared to have limited remaining assets. Shopping centers and office complexes that had relied on corner bakery locations to provide convenient dining options for tenants and visitors now face vacancy issues that affect overall property values and tenant retention. The few locations that remain operational exist under different ownership structures that bear little resemblance to the original corner bakery concept. Menu offerings have been dramatically reduced while preparation methods have been simplified to reduce labor costs and operational complexity. These surviving outposts feel more like generic cafe operations using familiar branding rather than authentic corner bakery locations. Corporate communications about restructuring efforts and potential recovery plans have been notably sparse, consisting mainly of generic statements that provide no specific timeline or strategy for addressing fundamental business problems. The absence of meaningful corporate response suggests that recovery efforts, if they exist at all, are focused on asset liquidation rather than operational restoration. Employee experiences during the collapse highlight the human cost of sudden business failure. Many workers describe arriving for scheduled shifts to find locations permanently closed without advance notice or final paychecks. The lack of proper closure procedures left staff members without employment references or documentation needed to file for unemployment benefits. Franchise operators who had invested substantial personal resources in corner bakery locations found themselves responsible for lease obligations and equipment financing that continued long after revenue generation became impossible. Many describe feeling misled about the financial stability of the corporate parent company and the true scope of operational challenges that made individual location success unlikely. The breakfast and lunch segments that Corner Bakery once served have been absorbed by competitors who recognize the opportunity created by sudden market exits. Fast casual chains and independent operators have expanded their offerings to capture customers who once relied on corner bakery for convenient meal options in business districts and shopping centers. Number 2, Ruby Tuesday. Walking through American shopping malls today reveals the ghostly presence of Ruby Tuesday locations that once anchored food court areas and provided reliable dining destinations for families completing weekend shopping trips. The dark dining rooms and empty salad bars that now characterize most remaining locations feel like archaeological sites preserving evidence of casual dining concepts that no longer resonate with contemporary consumer preferences. The transformation from bustling restaurant chain to collection of largely abandoned properties happened gradually, then suddenly, as financial pressures that had been building for years finally overwhelmed operational capabilities. Locations that generated steady traffic for decades found themselves operating with minimal staff and reduced hours that made consistent service impossible to maintain. Corporate asset sales have accelerated as management attempts to generate cash flow from real estate holdings and equipment that once supported profitable restaurant operations. The liquidation process has been particularly visible in mall locations where Ruby Tuesday fixtures and furnishings have been removed while dining spaces remain vacant, creating obvious reminders of the chain's declining presence. Supplier relationships have deteriorated as payment terms became increasingly extended and order volumes declined to levels that made continued service economically unfeasible for food distributors. The reduced purchasing power has affected ingredient quality and menu consistency at remaining locations, creating customer experiences that bear little resemblance to what Ruby Tuesday once provided. The salad bar concept that once differentiated Ruby Tuesday from competitors has become a liability in contemporary dining environments where food safety concerns and operational costs make such offerings impractical to maintain. Attempts to modernize menu offerings have failed to generate meaningful customer interest, while alienating longtime patrons who associated the brand with specific food experiences that are no longer franchise relationships have become increasingly strained as corporate mandates conflict with financial reality at individual locations. Multi-unit operators describe being caught between brand standards they cannot afford to maintain and customer expectations that reflect what Ruby Tuesday once delivered, rather than what current operations can realistically provide. The disconnect has led to widespread abandonment of franchise agreements as operators choose to rebrand their locations rather than continue operating under terms that guarantee financial losses. Staff retention has become virtually impossible as reduced operating hours and uncertain future prospects make Ruby Tuesday positions unattractive to experienced restaurant workers. The remaining locations operate with skeleton crews who lack proper training on food preparation and customer service standards that once defined the brand experience. Customer complaints about service quality and food consistency have accelerated as inexperienced staff struggle to maintain even basic operational standards. Marketing efforts have been reduced to local promotional campaigns that vary dramatically between remaining markets. The absence of coordinated national advertising has made Ruby Tuesday nearly invisible to potential customers, while creating confusion about which locations remain operational. Digital presence has deteriorated to the point where online ordering systems frequently direct customers to permanently closed restaurants. The competitive casual dining landscape has evolved substantially while Ruby Tuesday struggled with fundamental operational issues. Chains that successfully adapted their concepts to contemporary consumer preferences have captured market share that Ruby Tuesday once held, while new fast casual concepts have eliminated the need for traditional sit-down service that justified Ruby Tuesday's original market position. Real estate values at former Ruby Tuesday locations have declined substantially as the brand's departure signals broader challenges with mall-based dining concepts. Property managers report difficulty finding replacement tenants willing to invest in spaces that require substantial renovation to accommodate different restaurant concepts or retail operations. Number 1. O'Charley's. The systematic dismantling of O'Charley's restaurant locations across the American South represents perhaps the most dramatic collapse among traditional casual dining chains. What distinguishes this failure from other struggling restaurant concepts is the complete absence of any coherent recovery strategy or meaningful corporate communication about future prospects. Locations are simply disappearing from communities where they served as gathering places for decades, leaving behind empty buildings and bewildered former employees who received minimal advance notice about permanent closures. The debt accumulation that has buried O'Charley's extends far beyond normal business obligations into territory that suggests fundamental mismanagement at corporate levels. Creditor claims include suppliers who provided goods and services for months without payment, landlords holding unpaid rent obligations that stretch back quarters, and equipment financing companies seeking recovery of assets that have already been liquidated or abandoned at closed locations. Mass layoffs have affected every level of operations from kitchen staff to regional management, creating unemployment situations that ripple through communities where O'Charley's locations were among the larger employers. Former workers describe being informed of permanent closures through text messages or discovering their workplace had been permanently shuttered when they arrived for scheduled shifts. The lack of proper termination procedures has left many without final paychecks or employment documentation needed for unemployment benefits. Corporate asset liquidation has accelerated beyond normal business restructuring into what appears to be complete organizational dissolution. Restaurant equipment, furniture, and fixtures are being sold through commercial auctioneers rather than transferred to remaining locations, suggesting that management has abandoned any pretense of operational continuity. The fire sale pricing on these assets indicates desperation to generate immediate cash flow rather than strategic downsizing for future operations. Legal complications surrounding the closures have created additional problems for franchise operators who invested substantial personal resources in O'Charley's locations. Many describe discovering financial obligations they were never informed about during franchise agreements, including corporate debts that became their responsibility when parent company assets proved insufficient to cover outstanding obligations. The regional concentration of O'Charley's locations has made the collapse particularly visible in southern markets, where the chain once competed successfully against national casual dining brands. Entire metropolitan areas that once supported multiple locations now have none, creating obvious gaps in the dining landscape that highlight how quickly established businesses can disappear when financial foundations crumble. Supplier relationships that took years to develop have been severed permanently as food distributors, beverage companies, and service providers write off substantial losses from unpaid invoices. The ripple effects extend to local suppliers and vendors who depended on O'Charley's locations for significant portions of their business revenue, creating secondary economic impacts in communities already dealing with job losses from restaurant closures. Customer loyalty programs and gift card obligations have become worthless as corporate entities responsible for honoring these commitments appear to have insufficient assets for meaningful recovery. Thousands of customers who purchased gift cards or accumulated rewards through dining programs have no realistic prospect of recovering their investments. Real estate implications extend beyond individual restaurant properties to affect entire shopping centers and commercial districts where O'Charley's served as anchor tenants. Property values have declined as vacant restaurant spaces prove difficult to lease to replacement tenants, particularly in markets where multiple dining establishments have failed simultaneously. The few remaining O'Charley's locations operate in a state of uncertainty that makes normal business planning impossible. Suppliers require cash payment for deliveries, staff turnover has accelerated as employees seek more stable employment, and customer traffic has declined as word spreads about the chain's financial instability. These surviving outposts feel more like remnants awaiting inevitable closure rather than viable businesses with sustainable futures. Corporate silence about recovery plans or restructuring efforts suggests that management has effectively abandoned any attempt to preserve the O'Charley's brand or operational concept. The absence of meaningful communication with stakeholders, creditors, or the public indicates that whatever assets remain are being managed for liquidation rather than business continuity. The speed and scope of O'Charley's collapse have shocked industry observers who remember the chain's position as a reliable competitor in casual dining markets. The transformation from profitable regional operation to complete organizational failure happened so rapidly that suppliers, employees, and customers had minimal opportunity to adjust to changing circumstances or protect their interests. Equipment financing obligations continue to generate legal complications as lenders pursue recovery of assets that may have been sold, abandoned, or transferred without proper documentation. The complexity of these financial entanglements suggests that resolution may require years of litigation, even after the last restaurant closes permanently. These 6 restaurant chains represent more than just failed business ventures. They symbolize the end of an era when casual dining dominated American food culture and brand loyalty could sustain mediocre operations for decades. Behind each closure are thousands of employees who built careers around these concepts, franchise owners who invested life savings in what seemed like stable opportunities, and communities that lost familiar gathering places where families celebrated milestones and friends maintained traditions. What makes these collapses particularly sobering is how quickly they accelerated once financial foundations began cracking. Years of gradual decline suddenly became months of desperate liquidation, leaving stakeholders with minimal time to protect their interests or find alternatives. The human cost extends far beyond corporate balance sheets into real families facing unemployment, suppliers writing off substantial losses, and customers discovering that gift cards and loyalty rewards have become worthless overnight. The restaurant industry landscape that emerges from this consolidation will look fundamentally different from what previous generations knew. Independent operators and regional chains that successfully adapt to contemporary consumer expectations will fill some gaps, while national brands that maintain operational discipline will capture larger market shares. What won't return is the assumption that familiar names and nostalgic concepts can survive indefinitely without evolving to meet changing economic realities and customer demands.